The village was asleep. No glowing screens, no watches, no numbers glowing beside a bed, just darkness and silence. Then suddenly, a bell rolled through the freezing air. One farmer opened his eyes. A baker stood from his straw mattress. A monk lit a candle. Somewhere outside, horses shifted in their stalls. And across the town, hundreds of people began moving at the same moment. Because in medieval Europe, church bells didn't just call people to prayer, they controlled the rhythm of life itself. For most people, time wasn't something you looked at, it was something you heard. And for centuries, entire towns lived according to the sound of bells echoing from church towers. Today, we experience time privately. You wake up to your own alarm, you choose when to sleep, you decide when the day starts. But medieval Europe was different. Time belonged to the community, and the church bell was the heartbeat holding that community together. Especially after the spread of Benedictine monastic life, where monks followed strict schedules of prayer throughout the day and night. Before sunrise, bells called monks to matins. At dawn came lauds, then prime, terce, sext, non, vespers, compline. Again and again, the bell divided the day into sacred moments. At first, these sounds mostly governed monasteries, but over time, towns began organizing themselves around the same rhythm. Farmers adjusted labor around bell schedules. Markets opened after morning bells. Workers stopped at evening bells. Travelers listened for bells in unfamiliar towns to understand the pace of local life. The sound spread beyond religion. It became structure itself. Imagine growing up in a world where almost every important moment arrives as a sound from above. Not a notification, not a personal reminder, a giant voice hanging over the town. And after hearing those sounds every day for years, people no longer needed to consciously think about the schedule. Their bodies learned it. The morning bell created movement, the midday bell created pause, the evening bell created relief. Humans are incredibly sensitive to repeated rhythms. You can see it even today. Schools use bells, factories use whistles, modern phones vibrate with reminders until people instinctively reach into their pockets. But medieval church bells were even more powerful because they weren't optional. Everyone heard them. Rich or poor, farmer or merchant, child or elder. An entire town could slowly fall into the same behavioral rhythm without speaking a single word to each other. And the bells weren't soft. Some medieval church bells weighed several tons. The largest bells could be heard from miles away, especially in cold air or open countryside. There are records from medieval France and England describing people identifying nearby towns purely from bell sounds. Certain bells had distinct tones that locals instantly recognized. In a way, every town had its own voice, and people formed emotional attachment to these sounds. Church bells announced weddings, festivals, victories, holy days, but they also announced disasters, fires, raids, deaths. Different ringing patterns carried different meanings, and medieval people learned them almost instinctively. A sudden rapid ringing at the wrong hour could send an entire town into panic before anyone even explained what happened. During plague outbreaks, funeral bells rang constantly. Some historical accounts describe the sound became psychologically exhausting, not because people were reading death counts, but because grief physically echoed through the streets all day long. The town couldn't escape it. Every bell reminded people that someone nearby had just died. And over time, bells became more than tools. People treated them almost like living protectors. Some churches performed formal blessing ceremonies for bells using holy water and oils. Bells were given names. Certain communities believed the sound could drive away evil spirits, which sounds superstitious now. But imagine hearing the same bell for your entire life. It wakes you as a child, calls you to festivals, warns you of danger, marks funerals, echoes through wars. Then one day it rings for your own burial. At that point, the bell no longer feels like an object, it feels woven into reality itself. What's fascinating is how this changed the way people experience existence. Modern life trains us to think of time as personal, my schedule, my productivity, my routine. But medieval bells constantly pulled people into shared behavior. When the bell rang, everyone reacted together, and psychologically, that changes how a society feels. You feel more connected to the movements of other people. There's a strange comfort in shared rhythm, but there's also pressure because when everyone follows the same signals, individuality becomes harder to separate from the crowd. And maybe that's why old church bells still feel haunting today, even for people who aren't religious. There's something ancient hidden inside the sound, something communal, a memory from a world where time didn't live in your pocket, where life moved according to the echoes in the air, and where a single bell could wake an entire town from sleep.